Good day. My name is Bruce Scott, Territory Senior Partner, PwC Jamaica. And I'm here to continue the discussion around how organizations should change the way they see risk. And within PwC, we have come up with 4 questions that leaders need to think about, need to answer in this journey as to how they're going to change the way they see risk. And the first question that we've come up with is, are you clear on how generative AI will disrupt your sector? Yes, will disrupt is not a matter of if. And therefore, have you started to develop a plan as to how your organization is going to come out as one of the winners? And the second thing is that, do you have sight of the threats that are on the horizon? There are so many things that could kick your company over the cliff. There are shocks that you need to build capital to absorb. You need to be able to see around the corner. And the third thing, having recognized the influence of generative AI and the threats around the corner, you now need to have the capacity and the resources. I kind of touched on this earlier, but this point speaks to the ability as to how quickly you respond to disruptions. You can't stop certain things from happening, but you need a system of response in your organization to quickly respond to risk so that you can stymie any contagion effect. And the last thing, really, really important, everybody likes to talk about doing risk assessments. But do you have a data-driven, technology-driven risk assessment methodology? Not just one where you're using manual Excel spreadsheets. And by the way, nothing is wrong with manual Excel spreadsheets. That's where many of our clients start, and we call that ERM 1.0. But you really need to start moving to a system where you're listening to your data, the volumes of data that you have in your branches if you're a financial institution, in your claims record if you are a property insurance company, and the technology will tell you things about what's happening with your claims process, the turnaround time, a little bit more accuracy around your claims ratio. So remember what I'm talking about. If you're going to change the way your organization sees risk in this disruptive, competitive world, you need to start the dialogue with answering these 4 questions. And the reason why we need to, as I said earlier, change the way we see risk is that we are living in a world where the disruptive forces, geopolitical issues, climate change issues are so pervasive and so disruptive that you need to start to change the way you see risk. We did a study recently, and 40% of CEOs said, and these CEOs actually recognized that they need to change the way how they see risk. They said, if we do not change our business model, if we do not sit down as a group and almost revamp all of what we're doing, they basically said they don't think their companies will be relevant 10 years from now. And part of that discussion must be how they change their view on risk. So what's risk, by the way? I've been talking about risk. There's so many definitions of risk. ISO 31000 ERM framework gives a definition. The COSO ERM framework gives a definition. The IEEE framework gives a definition. But when all is said and done, risk is about 3 variables. 1, your business objective. 2, probabilities, the probability of something happening that could disrupt those objectives. And 3, the impact, positive or negative impact. So that's what we mean. So if risk is set within the context of an objective and you have a robust risk identification and assessment system, you're changing how you see and identify those risks, because risk is ultimately something that could kick your big objectives over the cliff. Those who change the way they see risk in terms of how they identify and assess will hit those objectives, and you're going to run faster. So next thing you should be asking yourself, with all that's going on in the world, what are CEOs saying about big things that are on the rise in terms of risk? PwC, you know we like to do studies, right? In our Global Risk Survey 2023, where we interviewed 3,910 business leaders across a wide variety of sectors. And the question was asked, what are the top 5 risks that you feel extremely vulnerable about over the next 12 months? Can you tell me which one emerged as number 1? Inflation. 39% say that's the big thing. Number 2, probably no surprise here, cyber risk. Number 3, macroeconomic volatility, that's your employment rate. and stuff like that. Digital and technology risk, no surprise there. And you could guess number 5. There's no discussion you can have nowadays without talking about climate risk. So those are the top 5. So remember what we're talking about. Changing the way how we see risk. I went through the 4 questions and the benefits of doing that. And then I'm teasing a little bit, having defined what risk means. What are the top 5 risks that leading CEOs are thinking about? And I gave you 5. And the 5th one, the top 5, number 5 in the top 5 was climate. The other 4, they're kind of well documented. Inflation has been a big agenda item. It was very high during COVID. It's trending down now. Central banks are slowly holding their policy rates, having brought them down, but inflation is still a big deal. So guess what? I don't want to talk about inflation so much in this discussion or the macroeconomic stability. I want to sharp the lens on number 5, but explode it out to the broader concept of ESG. So climate is opening the door now for a little discussion on ESG. Now, ESG, environmental, social governance. It's a big discussion around how companies should measure their success. Back in the day, especially when you read some of the more traditional economists, they talk about a company's success is built around profitability. That's no longer the game that we're in. A company's success is not just profits, but it's also the social impact. How did you make those profits? Did you have a very damaging effect on the environment? And how are your governance procedures, your ethical procedures? So it's a wider discussion than profits. And like I said, climate, top 5, but I want to explode that out into a wider discussion on ESG within the context of changing the way you see risk. I'm going to pivot this now to a concept that I touched on earlier. You cannot talk about changing the way you see risk without changing how you do your risk identification and assessment. I spoke to that earlier. Part of that change is using data analytics to listen to the data, not just huddling in a room with your senior leadership team. But here's what I want to do. I want to provoke you a bit. Traditional risk assessments include a general discussion around your strategic objectives and your process objectives. And that's fine, we do a lot of that with clients. But I want to challenge you that you now need to be doing a subset. It's like you have a house and you have this little special room in the house that you go, and whether you are a believer, you pray, or you have a games room, that little room is just a special room for you. I want you to think about your ESG risk assessment room. When you push the door of that room, you're going to see all the ESG risks that you need to start paying more attention to, because this topic is going to be so much of a topic. It's not going anywhere. And there are a couple of things that I want to say as you think about doing your ESG specific risk assessment. And the first one that I would like to talk about is more seeing ESG risk as an opportunity. For those who invest, for those who respond to ESG risks, these are some of the positive impacts or benefits that you will enjoy. All right? So risk is not just about hazards. Risk is not just about uncertainty. Risk is also about opportunity. And so when you sharpen the lens on how you're identifying and assessing not just the negative impact of ESG behaviors, positive, these are some of the things that will happen to you from a positive perspective. Number 1, revenue growth. If you as a company decide to look at your products and services and see the level of greenness, and if your customers see that you are using sustainable methods, you are recycling stuff, you are using more renewable energy in delivering your final product, the studies are now showing that customers take a big interest in that, and they're going to be more warm to your products and services. And so if you're using fossil, again, not condemning fossil, because that's where some people are, if you're moving to more sustainable means of delivering your products and services, the studies suggest that you're likely to have bigger revenue growth, because more and more of the population globally, especially the younger generation, they're making buying decisions based on how sustainable your products are. So when you do that risk assessment, make sure that you appreciate the fact that your revenue could likely to grow. And then the cost reduction. Your costs should go down, because if you're using cheaper, more renewable sources, that will, in the end, mean less energy costs for you. Regulatory affairs and impact. A lot of governments now in Jamaica, our government recently gave some low-cost loan to entities who are willing to use solar and stuff like that. It's a little bit cheaper in terms of the loan that you'll get to build out those facilities. And if you have a low interest rate, then that means you are going to have a lower cost of production. And so those are some of the key benefits if you are, in fact, making sure that you take advantage of the positive impacts of behaving wisely when it comes down to managing environmental risk. But that was risk as opportunity. If you are not prepared to pivot in your organizations and to take better care of your environment, you're more socially responsible and have good governance practices, good ethical practices, then the dark forces of the bad things surrounding you not managing these risks will visit your doorsteps. And I said earlier, your revenue growth, if you're doing sustainable products because your customers are gonna get excited, the opposite is true. If you're not managing your ESG risk properly, you could lose customers. If you have ethical issues, your company is landing on the front page of the newspaper because of stuff that you're doing to the environment, perception of not being too diverse, or you're not having enough social inclusion, some of your customers might take offense to that. You might actually start losing customers. Penalties and sanctions and enforcements. Governments are now fining companies, more punitive actions for companies who have their affluents in rivers and so on that they're not supposed to. And workforce issues. Yeah, a lot of employees, like I said earlier, the opposite is true. They're very militant nowadays in terms of how they respond to their own businesses if they don't believe that they're behaving in an environmentally friendly way. And the last one, especially if you're a manufacturing entity, if you're not thinking about how to shift away from energy sources that are not environmentally friendly, again, I'm not beating up on fossil, you could end up with an investment in a plant, the value of which probably will be going down as your competitors move to more renewable energy sources to drive their production machine. As we wind this down, John Maxwell said, everything rises or falls on leadership. And if you are going to navigate the choppy waters of a difficult environment as you change the way you see risk, there's a significant role for your board to play as the board guides. Mr. Cadbury, in his report on corporate governance, gave a brilliant response to what corporate governance is. And the definition echoes for the ages. It's a system by which companies are directed and controlled. And it is the board that gives oversight, working with management, who executes the daily decisions that are made. So what then has the board's role, or I should say, as the board's role change, or how will your board role change as your organizations seek to change the way you manage risk? In other words, what should the board be doing differently? When I did my MBA, one of the professors says, if a company is going to buy a new business, the company must make sure that they have the ability to be a good parent of that business, so that you are able to get the best value out of it. And that's kind of like what I'm saying. Can your board continue to be a good parent of the strategic direction in which your company is going, given that we're going to be focusing on risk in a different way? I would say from a governance perspective, the board's role does not change. You still have oversight. But what needs to change is the level of education at the board level. Board members need to go through rigorous training of risk assessment, what risk is, ESG, so they have a wider worldview. Number two, board members need to give a little bit more independent challenge, but for board members to do that, they need to have a deeper grasp of the risk issues. They need to understand risk management concepts. And number three, the risk information that board members are getting in terms of being quickly able to identify the top 5-10 risk issues, the mitigating actions, the budget to execute, and the timelines. Board members, you need to demand simplified information that you can quickly get to the risks that really matter. You are focusing on the big ticket items. So what content board members get will need to change in terms of what you show them. And the composition of your board. Yes, the studies show that we need to have a financial expert when it comes down to financial matters. I'm arguing strongly that we're at the stage where we will need a risk expert or somebody who's close to that to help boards to manage it. And the last thing that I would like to say is, where does good enterprise risk management fit into all of this? It fits in nicely, because every single thing that I've said earlier hangs on the chassis of having a good enterprise risk management program. And as I close with this vision. Your ERM program, you should think of it like a football game where the opposing side is attacking the defending side. And the striker and the team that's attacking, the first line of defense would be the forward line that's trying to get the ball. The second line is the midfield, and the third line is the defense system. Forgive me for those who don't understand football, or what the Americans would call soccer. So your enterprise risk management system needs to be designed in such a way that the forward line that's trying to get the ball from the opposing team is as strong as possible. And the biggest strength there is the ability of your first line, your department heads and the managers, to learn how to identify and assess risk. They cannot wait for the regulators or the internal auditors to come and tell them what their exposures are. So there's a lot of investment that will be required in that first line. They need to have quarterly risk assessment exercise. And then you need a strong risk manager, somebody who now probably reports directly to the board risk committee or the audit committee. A lot of boards are now demanding that the risk manager reports in the same way as internal audit to improve the level of independence of the risk information that board gets. That risk manager is like your midfield. So if something slips through the first line, the risk manager is there to catch that particular thing. So the question is, where does good ERM fit into all of this? It fits nicely. It's super important. How do you strengthen your ERM program? Invest in your first line, train them, give them the tools to identify and assess risk. Build your second line, invest in a good risk manager. They will challenge you, work with your first line, and do not under budget, do not under invest in your internal audit function. I've said quite a bit, and as I come to the end of this video, I hope you and your leaders, your managers, would now have a sort of a mini roadmap as to the things that you need to do that will help you to change the way you see risk. Belief affects behavior, and if you believe the things that I said and how they can help your organization to better navigate a difficult external environment with the geopolitical issues, inflation issues, macroeconomic issues, if you apply these principles, they will help you to better hit your objectives, deliver the value, not just focusing on profits, but keeping the environment in mind, and your organization will soar like an eagle. Thank you very much.